Hello and welcome to another Thursday here on Viking.TV with me, Anne Diamond, from cold and frosty Britain. And as you can see, I'm beginning to get into the Christmas mood. Well, it is only a couple of weeks away, and I do hope that, like me, you are able to celebrate it with at least a few of your family and friends. Though I think we all realise it's going to be a very different Christmas from the one we were hoping for. As you know, here on Viking.TV, we promise you the company of someone you would really love to meet yourself. And my guest tonight is a worldwide favourite. Tonight, if this year were a normal year, he would be busy hosting one of his favourite events, and one to which I've been happy to go along to many times. In fact, over the years, his parties have become so fabulously successful that he doesn't just throw one Christmas party, he throws several on consecutive nights. He is a world famous and best-selling author, but he doesn't stop there. He is a great speaker. He's written speeches for prime ministers. He raises millions of pounds for charities and is also in the business known as one of the best ever celebrity charity auctioneers. More of that later. Right now, as I said, he should be hosting his fabulous Christmas party, where traditionally the food is always surprisingly but brilliantly simple. It's always shepherd's pie and champagne. It works. You can be in his fantastic penthouse overlooking the Thames and Big Ben and the Houses of Parliament. You can be rubbing shoulders with movie stars and politicians, and they're all nibbling away at their shepherd's pie while they talk to you. The atmosphere is fantastic. The conversation twinkles like fairy lights, and everyone in the newspapers the next day moans about how they weren't invited. My guest is Jeffrey Archer, and he joins us now from that fantastic home in London. And a very, very good evening to you, Jeffrey.
Thank you very much, Anne, and it's lovely to see you. And I'm only sorry you will not be present at my party this year. I still have the shepherd's pie. I still have my favorite drink, a lovely glass of wine, but I have no guests. No guests. No, I'm on my own. Even Mary's over at the Science Museum. I'm on my own. In fact, I'm going to put an advertisement in the Times and saying, lonely husband requires new wife. I told this to Mary last night, and Mary said, do get in touch, do ask them to get in touch with me before they make the decision.
Oh, I'm so sorry. This is such a weird year, isn't it? Strange year.
Yes.
So you are now in London, and I know that a family Christmas is very important to you. How would you normally be celebrating it?
Well, we stay here for the two parties in London. Then we go down to Cambridge. This is my office where I write in London. Then we go down to Cambridge, because Mary spent a great deal of her life in Cambridge when she was a don at Trinity College, and then she became chairman of the local hospital, the famous hospital, Addenbrooke's, one of the great hospitals in Britain. And now she's chairman of the Science Museum in Great Britain. So she goes on working absolutely flat out, which suits her ideally. She's a bit like you. You've never stopped working. You go on and on. And we now live in an age. Where you're allowed to, Anne. You're not just dismissed.
Yes, but you go on and on. You never stop.
On and on.
I know.
Well,
let me go back to family, because you are amazing. You have had such a long and successful marriage, and you're a grandfather now quite a few times over, aren't you?
Now, thank heavens, because we've been married 54 years. Coming up for 55. I unfortunately had two sons. I wanted three daughters. I lost that one, but we now have, hold your breath, two grandsons and two granddaughters. Oh. And one of my daughters-in-law is pregnant again, and I've said she's to call me if it's a girl.
Yeah, because I know you love your sons, and I have 5 sons, so I know how you feel. But there's something very special about a daughter. At last you have a granddaughter too that you can indulge.
Yes, well, I feel very envious of men who have daughters. It's a favorite restaurant I have in London, which you may know, Anne, called Lucio's in the Fulham Road, which I adore. And the head waiter there announced yesterday when I was having dinner, really knew he'd annoy me. He said, I had a third daughter last week, a third daughter. And all I could say is, you'll be penniless for the rest of your life. And he said, yes, Jeffrey, but I'll be happy for the rest of my life.
Oh, absolutely. I've got to move my shepherd's pie now away from the dog.
We're to try it, are we?
The dog is after my shepherd's pie. Let me move it.
There we are. I've got it as well.
Yeah, so it will be a quiet Christmas this time.
Well, what happened in the real world with coronavirus and with being shut down was that I was one of the very lucky ones. I mean, I'm 80 years old, and of course I could just retire and call it a day, but I was able to write for 146 days in a row. So I wrote a whole book during coronavirus. Now, I had a lunch today, a rather special lunch today, and I had the lady who very kindly comes in and does special lunches. She was saying she's had a terrible year because she hasn't been able to go out into other people's homes and make special lunches for them. And so some people have had the most terrible time during COVID-19, and I sympathize greatly. I can't complain because writers can just go on writing,
yes.
Which is, so I've been at that level very lucky. And very lucky too that at my age I have a lovely home. My son met a lady in the park straight after lockdown, and she said she had 3 young children, 8, 6, and 4, and they live in 3 rooms in a high-rise, and she was there for 146 days. Oh. And she said she was a frazzled wreck.
Yes.
So some people have had the most terrible time, Anne, and I am not complaining. I've been very, very lucky indeed.
But like I said, it will be quiet this Christmas. But on the other hand, you and Mary have had the most incredible marriage, the most incredible union together. What will you do this Christmas? Will you just sit back like ordinary people and watch movies, or what?
Well, I'll be fine. I always write on Christmas Day. It's a mental thing. I get up at 6 and write 6 to 8. Boxing Day, Christmas Day, New Year's Eve, just to mentally make sure I do it. Mary's worse than me. She, poor darling, has had to close the Science Museum. Then she had to open the Science Museum. And she heard today that the Mayor of London may well announce that we're going into Tier 3, and she will have to close the Science Museum a second time. Well, if you think of how many museums there are in Britain and how many people lose their jobs when it's closed, that's another example. So she's having a hectic time, and I suspect Christmas, she won't take much time off after Christmas. She's exactly the opposite to Scrooge. She only has one thing in common with Scrooge. She doesn't totally approve of everyone taking off Christmas Day.
Now, you're in London at the moment, which, as I was telling everybody, is this amazing penthouse apartment with the most incredible view. But for Christmas, I think you'll probably go back to Cambridge, won't you? Where you live in the most amazing, historic, beautiful house. Tell us about your house.
Well, we're again very lucky. Many, many years ago, I was penniless, absolutely penniless, facing bankruptcy. Luckily, didn't go bankrupt. And I wrote a book called Cain and Abel. And it came out, or at least it was purchased by the Americans when we had nothing. And they paid $3,200,000 for it. So talk about going from nothing to overnight. I mean, I brought a new meaning to the words nouveau riche. but it meant we were able to buy this lovely house called the Old Vicarage in Grantchester, which was, of course, as many of you will know, the home of Rupert Brooke.
Yes.
Now, it was a mess, frankly, but my beloved wife, God bless her, if you looked at it now, I wish she'd taken films and pictures of it 40 years ago, because it is now the most beautiful house with the most beautiful garden. And that is, there it is. That is where, and look at those lovely, that's the gate going into the house. And that's our wall outside with those lovely red and green leaves. And that must be about October, I don't know, I suppose. Or maybe it's spring, but that's the house, or that's the side of the house as you come in. And it is truly beautiful. I am very lucky indeed.
You are, and lucky as well that it came up for sale when it did, when you just made your first millions with your first couple of books.
And the other irony, Anne, on that is that there was no motorway in those days. There was no M11. There was no science park, which Trinity College built. And there was no AstraZeneca on the land at Addenbrooke's. So houses were fairly sensible price, reasonable price. But after that lot, they've gone absolutely bonkers. So I got lucky in my timing as well. Very lucky.
Yes. And you have a folly at the end of the garden. Is that where you do most of your writing?
What a good memory you have, Anne.
Yeah.
At the end of the garden, we had an old folly with rats in it and everything. Mary pretty quickly cleaned them out. And she took the bottom of the folly where she has her office. And I have the top, which is a lovely old Victorian room where I write. And that's heaven. And I have 51 statues in the garden. I mention that because a lady came to see me last week from Cheffins, the auction house in Cambridge. And she asked if she could come and see my statues. And she said one of her problems in life was she had to commute 80 miles a day, 40 miles there, 40 miles back to get to Cheffins. I said, when I get out of bed, I have to go down the garden, get behind my desk. I think it take at least 2 minutes. And I do think now in old age that one of the great privileges is being able to commute a short distance. I think that does help. And so I've been lucky there as well. So I go from the old vicarage down to the folly and get on with my writing. And of course, in all these lockdown periods, it's either that or you go for a walk or you watch afternoon television. So frankly, I'd rather work.
Yes. Do you, I know he didn't live there awfully long, did he, Rupert Brooke? But do you feel an inspiration from him? Do you feel his spirit there at all?
Well, of course, the poem he wrote, The Old Vicarage, Grantchester, is an inspiration in itself and is considered by the English and was considered by Winston Churchill to be a great poem. And his poems on the war, Churchill quoted regularly, and his tragic young death bereft us of a great poet. So he's an inspiration in that sense. We didn't buy the house because of Rupert Brooke, because two houses came up on the same day. The chances of that happening in 100 years are rare, that are actually next door to each other. The mill house and the old vicarage came up on the same day, and they were pretty well the same price, £5,000 in it, no more. And Mary wanted the other house, and I wanted the old vicarage. Now, Mary quite rightly wanted the other house because we could have moved in immediately and got on with life. And she could see that the work that would needed to be done to make the old vicarage wonderful would take forever. Yeah. But I won that battle, and we moved into the old vicarage, and indeed it has taken it forever. But she now, I'm happy to say, she now is absolutely devoted to it and loves it, because it is a beautiful house, but she has made it beautiful.
Now you mentioned
that wall there, Anne. You see that wall?
Yes.
That wall wasn't there. Mary had that built by a local craftsman, built that wall, And I was fascinated. I knew nothing about walls. I didn't realize you have to, when he dug the hole, he had to have 6 levels of brick below the surface to keep it stable. I didn't know that. And he built all that, and we had to get old bricks. If you look carefully on the left-hand side, you can see they are old bricks. Yeah. We wanted old bricks to go in with the house, because the house was built in 1642, so and is 400 years old or whatever it is, 380 years. I don't know. But it's very, very old, like me. It's very, very old. And so getting it back and making it work was a tremendous task, but no regrets. Whereas the flat here, it's very modern. I mean, you've been here many times. Very modern.
That's what I was going to say. I mean, the house that you're speaking from is this wonderful penthouse apartment in London, overlooking the Thames. At what point did you buy that? Was that Cain and Abel that bought you that? Was that not a penny less, not a penny more that bought you that? Do you look upon, I mean, was it a certain book that bought you that apartment?
I purchased it from Bernie Eccleston. He lived here 40 years ago, whenever it was, and he was moving. He was going somewhere else, somewhere bigger and more, and I loved it because that view you just showed, Anne, is one of the loveliest views in London. There you can see the Queen's Tower, and you can see the House of Lords, and then of course the far end of the Palace of Westminster. You can see the House of Commons and Big Ben, which is currently covered in scaffolding and has been for a year. But that's the view I have from my drawing room. So every morning I get up. People often say to me, do you get bored with it, Jeffrey? I say, how could you get bored? It's every day. It's like looking at a wonderful Turner picture. I mean, it's just glorious. So, and that is, again, a great privilege. Now, those windows, if you can put them back up. Now, you can't see the windows there. You can there. Yes. Then now, you can't do that nowadays. The new European laws, of course, we may not be in Europe next week. The European laws demand that the windows are much smaller for safety's sake. But in those days, that was quite legal. They can't make you take them out. But if you did it again, you'd have smaller ones. So, Bernie, can you see the bridge in the distance, which is Lambeth Bridge? He brought them up the river on a barge and had them raised with a crane and put them in. And it was very clever of him, because he realized the greatest feature of the flat was the view. The view was everything. And he realized that was what would make it special. And how clever of him to put those amazing big windows in.
Which brings us back to your shepherd's pie parties, because I've been to several where you are looking at the view, you're holding a plate of shepherd's pie and a glass of champagne, and you can be talking to a movie star or an ex-prime minister or almost anyone. And actually, the most fascinating place to be sometimes is the queue for the loo. What made you think of those parties, and what made you think of serving something like shepherd's pie and champagne? What gave you the idea?
Well, because I've had the life of being a politician, a writer, and, as you kindly said, an auctioneer, I do meet such interesting people. In fact, I was thinking about it this morning in my grand old age. I was thinking the first champagne and shepherd's pie party, which I held over 40 years ago, Jack Profumo was one of the guests. Wow. Morecambe and Wise were one of the guests. Tony Hancock was one of the guests. Yes. If you go right back to the beginning, and of course, I had Ted Heath was the Prime Minister, and I had that group. I was only a child then. I was very much younger. So the fun, I always thought, was bringing people together who might not meet each other normally. So if you put together Margaret Thatcher and Joan Collins, you might see a few sparks fly. And I always thought the fun was, and I would always find it interesting that the politicians and the actors and the writers and all the people, they are fascinated by other professions. They are fascinated by other people. And it's always interesting who causes the most trouble. Now, I will tell you a story. Because being a man, I got it totally wrong. I invited Jimmy Chu to one of the parties, who
Yes,
I'd met. I'd
exactly.
done a charity function with and liked him very much indeed,
Mm.
and invited him to the Christmas party. And I thought, no one will know him. I'll have to be very kind and gentle, and I'll have to take him around. The women swarmed, absolutely surrounded him. I didn't have to rescue him at all. He was the big hit of the evening, and you can never tell. You can never tell who's going to steal the whole show. Donald Sinden always used to steal it, but then he loved stealing a scene, so he was very good at that. And Barry Humphries has them in fits all evening. Yeah, he always has people surrounding him and laughing away. And I love people who make you laugh. I love people who are kind and decent and make you laugh. He's top of my list for that. He makes every party better, and I'm always pleased, Anne, when you come. It's very kind of you to come. And
I remember the first time I ever realised that John Major, former Prime Minister of Great Britain, was a human being, was when I met him in the queue for the loo. And we just got talking, as you always have to do in a queue for the loo. And I suddenly realised, instead of this person on television who, frankly, was never very warm on television, and often had trouble coming across as a human being, suddenly was a real person and had a vivid sense of humour and was very funny. And it is in those moments that people do realise a real character, don't they?
Well, the thing with John Major that used to shock everyone, and I had the privilege of working with him for 7 years, is that I've never had anyone who'd never met him before not say, not at all what I expected, Geoffrey. They all, because he's a very genuine, nice guy to start with, and wanted to give service from a young age. So that's top of his pile. He always wanted to be a politician, and has remained a consummate politician all his life. And I knew him when he lived, you see, in St. Ives, which is just up the road from Cambridge. So he was the next door MP. So by sheer luck, I knew him when he was on the back benches and watched his career with fascination. And I remember the day, because he was only, I think it was 15 miles away. I remember the day I went up for Sunday lunch and he said, I think I'm going to put my name up for Prime Minister, Geoffrey. And we discussed it. And I remember at the time it was going to be Douglas Hurd or Michael Heseltine. And John's name didn't really get a mention. He wasn't really there. But he clearly felt he was in with a chance. And I had the privilege of being one of his supporters. And of course, he went on to be Prime Minister. And I think people now tell me regularly not only what a good Prime Minister he was, but how much they admire the very sensible statements he's made since being Prime Minister. He's now become more of a statesman. But our love was totally, which you may find hard to understand, and because you just may find hard to understand, our love of cricket. We both thought we ought to captain the England cricket team.
Absolutely.
He was pathetic as a batsman and worse as a bowler. But as he told me very clearly, I was even worse than he was. So we were neither ever going to captain England, which is what we really wanted to do. As Proust said, we all end up doing the thing we're second best at. So I didn't become captain of England. I wanted to be Prime Minister, failed. John wanted to be Prime Minister, succeeded.
I don't know about that. I know. Well, that was a great bond between you. What was the bond between you and Margaret Thatcher? Because you were close for quite a while. You used to write for her, didn't you?
Well, I didn't realise at the time, but I do realise now that was one of the great 11 years of my life, the privilege of serving Margaret Thatcher. And after she was, in my view, disgracefully removed, I think she would have won the next election, and I think she would have retired quietly afterwards. Mind you, she didn't do anything quietly. But we remained friends right through to her death. Mary and I used to see her every other Sunday in her lovely home in Chester Square, right through the days when she was an old lady. And I consider that was a remarkable 11 years of my life. And someone said to me the other day, what do you think she would have done about Brexit? And I had to say, I have no idea, but I would love to have sat with her and said, what would you have done? Because she sure would have had a strong view, and she sure would have expressed it. So yes, I like to believe I not only was a junior and insignificant servant at the time, but I like to believe in old age we became very close friends. When after Dennis died, Mary and I became very close friends. She stayed regularly at the old vicarage, as you know.
Yes.
She came to all our parties here. You will have seen her at all the champagne and shepherd's pie parties. I didn't see her eating a lot of shepherd's pie, but she didn't mind the champagne. She was all right there. And towards the end, you know, it was really sort of strange. When she was Prime Minister and she came to the parties, they wanted to speak to her, but they were frightened to do so. Towards the very end, when she was an old lady, it was most interesting. She would sit in the corner because she couldn't stand for a long time. She would sit on the corner seat by the window, and they would queue just to say hello. Yes. And that was enough. They just wanted to say hello. And I became very conscious of this in Cambridge because she came to our summer parties and then stayed the weekend, which was lovely. And I went to the student union at Cambridge, and they said, we're having a rag and we'd love to give one of the prizes that a person can come in the morning of your party and meet Margaret Thatcher. And I said, well, I'll ask her. And she agreed. She said, yes, that's fine. So I said, yes, one of the prizes is that one of you can come and see the former Prime Minister and talk to her for 15 minutes, and then I shall throw you out. 47 of them turned up.
Wow.
Claiming they'd all won the first prize. We sat her in a chair with these young people surrounding her, and I'll never forget it the rest of my life. What were they? 18, 19, 20, 21, surrounding this great old lady. And she answered their questions so directly, so firmly. They said, what about this? What about that? And bang, they got it straight back. I had to drag them out in the end. Actually, I'll let you know, Anne, I had to drag her out as well. Yes. She was loving it. That was well past her days as Prime Minister. But what touched me was the next generation wanted to talk to this great lady. Yes. And I thought one person would turn up. And I was actually, in the end, I was quite angry at the beginning that they hadn't told me. But she loved it so much, and it was such a success. I'll never forget it the rest of my life. And there was another occasion, Anne, when they invited her to dinner at Churchill College. She'd left all her personal papers, everything of any importance, to Churchill College, Cambridge. You will remember they failed to give her an honorary degree at Oxford, which was a disgrace, nothing less than a grace. A bunch of intellectual lefties who should have acknowledged the first woman Prime Minister properly, but they didn't. And so she left all her papers to Churchill College, Cambridge. And when the day she handed them over, they held a dinner in her honor, and they invited Mary and myself. And the head of the college, the master, lovely man, Alec, came up and he said, Geoffrey, we've got a problem. The police are saying that outside the gate, there are 100 students. And they're not sure why they're there, whether they're going to protest or what they're going to do. So I popped out to see them, and they clearly were huge fans. They just wanted to see her, no more. So I rang her in the car and I said, Margaret, when you arrive at Churchill, you're going to find 100 young people outside. Oh, she said, the young don't like me, Geoffrey. The young, they know, then they're not, I prefer just to know. I used to, I couldn't get out of the habit of calling her Prime Minister years after, because I didn't call her Margaret during her premiership. And so it became a sort of like a Christian name. So I said, well, Prime Minister, I think you should stop. I think you should ask the driver to stop and you should get out and talk to them. No, Geoffrey, no, they don't want to see me. No. I said, I really think you should stop, Prime Minister. So I talked her into it. Oh, they were overwhelmed. I sent the car on. It was only another 50 yards to the front door. I sent the car on, and she stayed with them, and they were in awe. They were just so polite and so courteous, and so thought she was so kind to stop. So, of course, then I had the other problem of getting her into the function she was meant to be in, which was always a problem with her. I used to say, 2 minutes, Prime Minister, and we have to move you. 2 minutes. 1 minute, Prime Minister, and we have to move. Took absolutely no notice at all. If she was enjoying meeting someone or she was doing something she thought, you couldn't move her for 1 minute, Prime Minister. You're speaking in 30 seconds, Prime Minister. You couldn't move her at all because she loved people.
Yes.
And she realized that day that the young liked her, they wanted to see her. They wanted to see this great old lady.
I remember also at some of those functions, you would often be called upon to be the auctioneer. And you were incredibly impressive as the auctioneer. And now you are very, very well known for somebody you can make millions out of one evening with the right audience. When did you discover you were such a brilliant auctioneer?
When did you start?
It's been a hobby now for 40 years. I've raised 65 million. I'm only allowed to say 51 million because Alison, who's taking care of me and is sitting there taking care of me, I've only raised 51 million during her time with me. But I had 20 years before I met her. So I think it's around 60 million. But don't let's kid yourself, Anne. I love it. I'm such a show off and I like the center stage. And auctioneering is such fun. And I love stealing money from people for charity. I've amazing stories of stealing large sums from people, though I confess only once. Only once did I actually, what I would call, almost go too far. Morecambe and Wise asked me to do their cancer charity down in the famous studio, the famous film studio, Elstree. Quite right.
Yes, that's where I was the other week.
And there was a widower there, and someone whispered in my ear that one of the prizes was to be on the Morecambe and Wise show. Do you remember at the end they always did a play written by Mr. Wise, written by Eric's play, and it was a scene somewhere, and they were going to have a scene in a big restaurant, and one of the prizes was you could sit in that restaurant on the night of the Christmas Morecambe and Wise show. So I thought, this is pretty good. And this dear old lady who'd inherited God knows how much wanted this more than anything on earth. So I said, who'll open it? And I got it up to £5,000 and there was no one left. So I thought, no. And I looked at the lady, I took her to 50,000, which I thought, yes, if it hadn't gone to leukemia or cancer, I would have felt guilty. But no, I didn't feel guilty because every penny went to saving people's lives. So I did feel guilty on the night because very kindly Morecambe and Wise invited me to the show. And I talked to her afterwards and she said, this has been the happiest day in my life. So I thought, all right. And I pointed out she'd also given a very large sum to a very worthy cause.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the point is when you do your auctioning, you know your audience, you know who's there, you know who's got the money, don't you?
You know who's got the money in the audience?
You get shocked sometimes, Anne.
Yeah.
You look at an audience and you think, I'll make $250,000 tonight. And then you only make 50,000. And you look at another audience and you think, oh, not much here. And you make $250,000. So you can't always be sure what will happen. My greatest joy was I was due to do one of my absolute favorite charities, Make-A-Wish. We always make around 300,000. It's one of my favorites at the Dorchester. And an hour before I was due to go, I got a call from a nurse at St. Thomas's. I've never forgotten it because I got my DJ on and I was ready to go. And this is a big one for me, Make-A-Wish. So I'm quite tense and worried. And this lady says, I hear you're an auctioneer. I said, well, yes, I'm a charity auctioneer. I do it occasionally. Yes, she said, well, I've got an auction and I need you. I said, well, I'm very flattered. Thank you very much. And when's that? She said, about an hour's time. She said, our auctioneer, who's a doctor, a very fine doctor, has gone ill. So could you pop in an hour's time? Well, it meant that I went to her. I could just get to the doctor in time. So I went to this auction at St. Thomas's Hospital, and she turned out to be the matron. Lovely lady. And she said, well, I've got a bottle of sherry and you very kindly have bought a signed book and I've got a box of chocolates. And we made £320. And she was over the moon. I went to the door thinking, oh God. I went to the door and she said, that's the largest sum we've ever raised. So they differ greatly, but some of them are tremendous fun. I did one for Romanian children once, where there was a man, very, very wealthy man, sitting with one of the most stunningly beautiful women I've ever seen. And he clearly wanted to show off. So he said, Geoffrey, how many? I'd done 2 auction items. I was on number 3. And he said, how many more of these, Geoffrey? And I said, well, it's 8 in all, sir. He said, well, how much will you take to stop auctioneering and sit down? So he was obviously showing, I thought, we're in here. I said, well, I was hoping to get $250,000, sir, but I'd settle for 150,000 if someone gave it to me now. He said, I'll give you 150,000 if you sit down. So I did. I took 150,000 and sat down, and I think the girl was very impressed. But I had another one with a beautiful woman too, which was embarrassing. Do you remember the antiques fair they do at Grosvenor House? They asked me to do an auction at the antiques fair at Grosvenor House. And one of the auction items was a trip to Florida, first class, wonderful hotel, golf course, everything, the whole thing. And there was a man standing in the audience with the most stunningly beautiful girl. And he clearly thought, if I get this prize, I will be able to take her to Florida. Yeah. But she was looking at me and she was letting me know there was no way she was going to Florida with this particular man. No. So I'm standing up there and I'm thinking, oh God, I'm caught now. She's going, and he's going, yes, I'm ready. So I said 5,000. I took him up to 20,000. She was livid with me. I took him up to 20,000 and we sold. I don't know what happened. And I do not know the end of this story. I only know we got the 200,000. Oh, I think now, because they come up to me all the time, story after story. I was telling two tickets for £500 to see England play Wales at Twickenham. And it went to 600 and a young man bid and I sold it for 600. I said 2 tickets sold to the gentleman there. And he came up afterwards and said, I don't have any money. I'm a student and I apologize. I was trying to help you. Well, of course he was. Yes, God bless him. He was absolutely sincere about this. He was trying to help me. So I went to the underbidder at 500 and he gave me 100 to make, and it must have been a lot of money to him. He gave me 100 to make it up to 600. So you're quite right, Anne. Over the years, it's not only brought me great happiness, but given me stories and introduced me to the most fascinating people. And I've missed it in this year. It's the one big thing I've missed. Yes. I've only done one auction this year, and that was on television for the great Sir Magdi Yacoub, who I love and adore. What a great, great man, the great heart surgeon. Great heart surgeon. One of England's truly great men. I did an auction for him 2 or 3 weeks ago and got him 1,100,000. Wow. On the television. Wow. It's not me. It's not me. They love him. Yes. They throw money at him. I pick up this shepherd's pie and say, this shepherd's pie was due to be eaten by Sir Magdi. I will give it to you for 10,000. And they say, over here, and they're all throwing their hands in the air. Me, 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 me. Right, we'll get you some more shepherd's pie and we'll pretend it's Sir Magdi's. 10,000, 20,000, 30,000, 40,000. And they love him because he saves lives, particularly children. His fame, of course, is operating on the heart for children.
Yes. but that is also about you and your ability to whip up enthusiasm and your ability to tell a story and your ability to grab people's emotions. And that brings me, I mean, we've been talking for a full 40 minutes and we haven't even mentioned your book. And you have a new book out, Hidden in Plain Sight. Tell us about Hidden in Plain Sight.
Well, I have to be totally honest about that, Anne. It's a simple gift. There's the latest book, Hidden in Plain Sight, which I'll tell you about in a moment. But the truth is that storytelling is a simple gift. I'm not a ballet dancer. I'm not a countertenor. I don't play the violin. I tell stories. And I'm very, very lucky because I tell them every day. Forgive me. I tell them every day. The latest one, well, there's Hidden in Plain Sight. Whoops, there's Hidden in Plain Sight. I wrote a set of books called the Clifton Chronicles. And in the Clifton Chronicles, my hero, Harry Clifton, was an author. And he runs all through all 7 books as an author. And he had, oh my gosh, that's clever. There they are.
Yeah.
He was a writer. And his eponymous hero was a man called William Warwick. And when I finished the Clifton Chronicles, many people wrote to me and said, we'd like to know about William Warwick. So I've started writing, and each book is individual, so it doesn't matter where you start. But I've started writing about William Warwick. And William Warwick, when he leaves school, joins the Metropolitan Police Force against his father's wishes. His father's a distinguished QC and wants him to become a barrister, go to Oxford and read law, but he's determined to join the Metropolitan Police Force. So he does as a constable. I'm taking some water because I'm coughing a little.
Absolutely. No, you go ahead. I can see that.
I'm ready.
We've been talking a lot. Yeah, go on.
He starts in book 1, Only Time Will Tell. No, that's the Clifton Chronicles. He starts in book 1, Nothing Ventured, as a constable. And he becomes a detective constable, and he goes to the art squad, and they have to find a missing Rembrandt that has been stolen. In book 2, which has just come out, Hidden in Plain Sight, he's transferred from the art squad to the drug squad. And he's chasing a man who lives on the south of the river and is running a great drug empire. And he has to find him. The problem is he lives in a high-rise flat on the 21st, 22nd and 23rd floor. And he has to work out how to get 40 policemen up to that floor and capture him before he escapes. And I'm not going to tell you how he does that, but he managed it. Now, the point is, Anne, that in book 1, he's a constable. In book 2, he's a detective sergeant. I wrote book 3 during coronavirus, where he's a detective inspector and he's dealing with bent policemen. And I'm just about to go away and start on book 4, where he will be a chief inspector and he's doing murder. He becomes head of the murder squad. Now, he's going, so far I've got him to chief inspector, constable, sergeant, inspector, chief inspector. If I live long enough, and I am 80 years old, I will take him from chief inspector, and after that he will become a superintendent, and then a chief superintendent, and then he will become a commander, and then he will become, if I live long enough, deputy commissioner, and then he will become commissioner of the Metropolitan Police. So you're going to get, I hope, 8 books, each one of them individual story in its own right, but he will be a different rank going from constable all the way through to commissioner. But I've got to live long enough to get him to commissioner. I know he's capable of being commissioner. I know he'll do a good job when he gets there, but it's whether I'll get there that matters.
Oh, I wanted you to tell us the wonderful story you told me a while ago about why you had to start launching your books first in India. And the story about when you arrived in India, I think, to launch one book, and you were in a traffic jam in a taxi.
Yes.
You remember the story. Tell us the story.
Well, the Indians have been very kind to me over the years. They're one of my biggest markets. I think one of the reasons is because I adore the game of cricket, and they know I wanted to captain the England cricket team. And indeed, the great Sunil Gavaskar has made several public statements about thinking it would be very good if I was captain of the England cricket team. I think he feels the Indians would like that very much indeed if I was captain. But no, what I discovered with cricketers, and in particular Indian cricketers, is they do a lot of tours, and they go all over the world, and they love to read. I mean, Kumble, great captain of India, Gavaskar, VVS Laxman, Raul Dravid, they're all great readers. So they became friends because they love the books, and we both love the game of cricket. But your story is quite right. I was coming out of the airport. I got into the car they'd very kindly sent to take me in. And I say got into the car because if it wasn't steaming hot, you could walk just as quickly from the airport into the middle of any of the major cities. In fact, I'm going to tell you another story that comes into my mind. In Chennai, I was in my beautiful white Mercedes floating down the road, and I overtook the most stunningly beautiful girl who was dressed in, lovely long sari, looking absolutely magnificent. And then she overtook me, then I overtook her, then she overtook me, and I was saying to the audience that evening, if another couple of 100 yards, we'd have been engaged. I mean, we just saw, and she was, so I love the Indian people. But I got into this car at Bombay Airport, and a little boy came and tapped on the window. And he had a pile of books. I mean, they are the greatest entrepreneurs on earth, the Indians. They start being entrepreneurs around the age of 5 or 6. They've got a pile of books. So I wound down the window, and he said, "Would you like the latest Jeffrey Archer?" And I said, "I am the latest Jeffrey Archer."
And that is why you had to launch the books first in India, because otherwise you could find that they were being pirated.
Yes, that is a problem in India, and I would never dare say it with my publishers listening. But the truth is that they won't let the books anywhere near India until a week after publication. They buy them at London Airport. They fly over, and they've got them on the streets 3 days later. Amazing. At a quarter of the price. Now, at one level, you've got to admire the entrepreneurial skill and activity of the little exercise. But of course, the publishers go mad, and so do the bookshops. They both go absolutely bonkers about this. The truth of the matter is, I had a chat to the editor of the Times of India, which is, as you know, the most read newspaper on earth.
Yeah.
I said, "Look, you've just made a statement in your paper this morning that 100 million people have read Cain and Abel. Have you got any proof of that?" And he said 50 million of them are in India, he said. Yeah. And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He said, "Well, if an Englishman if an Englishman buys a book, English woman buys a book, 2.2 people read it. If an American buys a book, 2.3 people read it." And he went through Europe, and he said, "But if an Indian buys a book, 10 people read it." Wow. It goes around the family, and then it goes around the village. And the book, if it's successful and popular, is read by many more people than any country on earth. And I've recently heard this is also true in China, where I haven't made a breakthrough at all. It may be, Anne, because they don't play cricket in China, that I haven't been able to make a breakthrough. But in
I was wondering why, and of course I didn't think of cricket. I was thinking because you write stories that are very dynastic. They're long term. They're about families and dynasties and many, many years. And maybe that is more to do with that sort of culture.
It's very interesting you say that, Anne. People are fascinated by people who've come from nothing, and it couldn't be in any field, and they get to the top. it doesn't matter what field it is, if they start with nothing and get to the very top, people are fascinated by what happened in their life, what were the things, and some people want to put it down to luck. Others want to, the truth of the matter is often, the many people I've known in my life who've made it to the top, they're very bright men and women and very hardworking. Those are the two elements, I would say, that are absolutely consistent. So when you have Cain and Abel, you have Abel born in a forest. His mother dies the moment he's born. And Cain is born in a Boston hospital built by his grandfather.
Yeah.
So you've got the total contrast. And you should know, of course, they are going to come and meet. And so you follow their young lives. And then, of course, Abel gets to America and is an entrepreneur. And he comes up against Cain, who's the banker, who's going to lend him the money. And that's the way it's going. And something goes very badly wrong. They only meet once in their life. And at the end of their life, they realized, no, I'm not going to tell you that.
No, yeah, you mustn't give it away, because there will be some people who won't have read it. But it is a good place to start. I noticed that you're wearing your Dale sweater, which is a sign of somebody who is part of the Viking family. So people are asking, have you been on a Viking cruise? Do you enjoy cruising?
I love it. And this is my Viking sweater. Look. Oh, wrong hand. That's television. There I am. Yes, I love it. Mary and I went on the longboats, or whatever you call them, the cruise ships down the river. And oh, look, now who can tell me, intelligent people watching this, what hat is that and who did the sculpture? You get 10 seconds, no more, and then I shall answer it. The hat is MCC, home of cricket.
Yes.
And the sculpture, of course, is Calder. That's an amazing Calder statue, one of the great modern sculptors. I love cruising. Mary and I, what I love most, very kindly, I was speaking on the tour, and very kindly they gave us a suite on the end. So we could look out of the back of the ship, and going down the Rhine, just staggered by the beauty. Wow, if you've never done a trip on one of those Viking longboats, as I call them, because Vikings have longboats, and their amazing leader, Thors Hagen, a truly great man who's become a friend over the years. The pleasure Mary and I have had out of that. And then Thors rang up and said, I'm launching another cruiser. Would you like to come on the opening voyage? And of course, Mary and I couldn't wait to get there. So it's been such fun. And this awful, awful COVID, which is, there we are.
Yeah.
There's the clever one on the right. The awful, awful COVID, which has stopped all this. I pray that by, say, next August, July, August, we'll be back to normal, because I like to do one trip a year, one on the longboat, as I call it, and one on the cruiser. And I've had so much fun and met so many interesting people on both. And I would say to those people, if you're a cruiser person, don't go on the longboats. They are every bit as exciting and every bit as amazing, because you stop in a new city every day. And what I love about it is, of course, you go back to your bedroom. If you took a car and you went to a different city every day, you have to stay in a different hotel every day, which means you have to unpack every day.
Yes.
You have to, and I'm not very good at that. So once you've got your lovely room and it's everything, you just enjoy it. I've been some of the happiest trips I've ever had. And I, of course, due to go this August. Mary and I were due to go, and I was due to speak on a Viking trip this August. And of course, I was not allowed to leave the house.
Yes. It's very frustrating, isn't it? Especially for somebody like you who loves traveling.
You love traveling.
Sorry?
Very frustrating. You love traveling.
I missed that one. Sorry, Anna. Apologies.
It's very, very, very frustrating for you because you love traveling so much.
Hold it. Very. I'm deaf, you know, all you people out there who are younger than I am and are gumming away wondering what the hell I'm doing. I'm now trying to find out. Oh, yes. I'm not complaining, Anne, and I'll tell you why.
No, I know.
If you're 80 years old and you've seen as much of the world as I have, what a privilege and what an honor. And I feel much more for young people who are now going through the most terrible time at university or at school, not getting their education. So, no, I've been very lucky and met some wonderful people. I met a wonderful man on one of the trips called Bill Samuel, who was in charge of property at the Royal Bank of Scotland. And we became friends straight away. And we've been friends for 20 years because of a trip on a Viking trip. And he said, yes, wonderful. But he's a much cleverer man than I am, very shrewd. He'd made his fortune, and they called for him at the bank when he was retirement age 60, and said, look, we can't lose you. We can't afford to lose you. You're a triumph. The customers love you. You're doing a wonderful job. Please, we'll put your salary right up. We'll give you every incentive to stay. He said, no. He said, I'm an uneducated man, and I am going to spend the rest of my life traveling around the world. Bill has now seen everything. Whatever subject you raise, he's been there, seen it, done it, and he's so fascinating to talk to. But I thought, what a remarkable thing that he didn't want to make more and more money and bore everybody. He and his wife set out to see the world, and he spent 15 years traveling around seeing everything. I chatted to him on Skype or whatever it's called, or Zoom or whatever I do, and that he's missing Viking a lot. Yes. He's missing the opportunity to see another country, to see another situation. He loves that. And I thought, what a shrewd, clever man who stops being a banker because he realizes he's got one life and he's got enough money. I'm going to educate myself, he said. Of course, he was already a well-educated man. It was his way of saying it. He used to embarrass Mary and myself with his amazing knowledge of Rabbie Burns. He could, at breakfast, give us an entire poem every morning.
Now, I mean, you've been talking a lot about Mary, and she, of course, wasn't she the first female Don at Cambridge? Very clever lady, a scientist. What does she say about COVID? When does she think we'll be out of all of this?
What does Mary think about COVID?
What does Mary feel about it?
Mm.
She feels everybody should take the vaccination. She feels very strongly. She's been saying, as chairman of the Science Museum, and a lot of people have been ringing her, you've got to take the vaccination. These very silly people saying, don't take the vaccination. She's really quite cross with them.
Mm.
And she wants me to take it. I'm 80, so I've got a chance, I hope, of taking it early. And she's saying, get on with it, Jeffrey.
Yes.
So she feels very strongly. Where she's fun is on a Sunday, she rings 2 or 3 of the leading scientists in our country and says, so we were well tuned in to how the vaccine was going. And because she was a professor at Imperial, she was educated at Oxford, and she's now at Cambridge. So she could talk to several people. So she's been following the different vaccines with amazement and fascination. But she's very keen. If anyone is listening, not me, I know nothing about science. I have no authority to say this, but my wife says very firmly indeed, if they want you to take the vaccine, take it.
And let's hope that means that we will all be able to travel again soon, I hope. And we may be able to meet up on a Viking cruise ship, which would be wonderful. And we could meet you in person again, Jeffrey. We've been talking for a full hour, and it's been an absolute privilege, as it always is. Such fun to talk to you. And every time I talk to you, you've always brought out a new book. I don't know how you produce so many books. How many books is it now?
34.
Oh, my goodness.
Or how many books have I sold?
No, oh yeah, go on, that too.
Well, they say 300, say 320 million, but who knows? I don't care now, in the sense that I do care who reads me, of course I do.
Yes.
And I do care about selling more and more books. But I write to be read. I don't have to write any longer. Frankly, I haven't had to write since Cain and Abel. But I love working, and it may be working with Margaret Thatcher for 11 years gave me a work ethic that I haven't been able to get rid of, because my children say, why don't you relax, Dad? Why don't you take a holiday, Dad? Why don't you go away, Dad? I think they mean go away. I think they actually mean go away, Dad. But I can't stop. So the answer to your question, Anne, is I love writing. I will go on writing. I would remind you that my hero, Dickens, died halfway through his final book. So that would suit me fine.
Yeah, that's not a bad way to look at it. I've got a few questions here from people who are watching from all over the world. I hope we can get through some of them. From Ron in Grosse Pointe in the United States, he said, I live outside of Detroit. I finished my first book at 79. I've begun my second now after a career as a truck driver. The books are gritty and done as mysteries, but what is your advice to somebody like me who can't get a publisher? How can somebody older get a publisher? How can you start writing as an older person? Are you able to answer any of that?
It's a very good question. And I always say to anyone who comes to see me, write about what you know about. So my interest has always been politics, art, both I love, and of course, sport. And so they all get into the book. So I always say to people, Anne, if you're a truck driver, tell us about the experiences you had as a truck driver, because you must have met some amazing people and had some amazing experiences. A lady came to see me a couple of weeks ago, Anne, and she said, oh, well, you know so many interesting people and you have such an interesting life. And she said, I can't write my novel because I don't. I said, what do you do? She said, I work in a hairdresser. I said, there are more stories in a hairdresser than you'll ever get anywhere else on earth, you lucky woman. Those women sitting behind those heaters chatting away, there'll be story after story after story. Just keep your ears open. And she'd never thought, she'd never realized that actually, and she said, you're quite right, I hear stories every day. I said, right, make your story around a hairdresser, make your heroine based on you, tell the people, and the reader will know you're writing about something you know about.
Yes. Now, Carol from Colombia says, do you draw inspiration from people you meet for your books?
Do I what?
Get inspiration from people you meet. Get inspiration from people you meet.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes, you can't not. Mainly in the short stories, and because they tell you a short story. They sometimes think it's a novel, but it isn't. And they tell you a short story, they tell you an incident, and you realize, may I give you an example? I was in Australia, and a man said to me, I've got a short story for you, Geoffrey. And 9 times out of 10, they haven't. But, you know, you never know when the little gold gem is going to come up. And he said, you know, when I had my 100th birthday, I got a telegram from the Queen. Of course you did, I said. Very proud I was. I stuck it on the wall. And I decided I had to live to 104. So I said, well, why did you have to live to 104, sir? He said, well, because my wife would be 100 in 4 years' time. And I did it. I got to 104, and she didn't get the telegram. Oh, I said, what did you do? He said, well, when she was out, I summoned up the courage to ring the palace and speak to her secretary. And they said, oh, I'm very, very sorry. I'll just look up her name immediately. And they looked up her name and they said, oh, yes, she did have a telegram 6 years ago.
No. Oh.
So you get a little gem like that,
Yes.
and you know straight away it's a short story.
Yes,
and then other times with Cain and Abel, I had 2 people in mind, a Rothschild who very kindly gave me a lot of his time, and a man called Kwiatkowski, who'd founded Sikorsky Helicopters and come from Poland. And I remember a young lady in America who introduced me to him said, you can't believe a word he says, Geoffrey. He makes it all up, escaping from Russia, getting to America. We're talking about a man who was one of the wealthiest and most successful people in America. I said, I don't give a damn.
No.
He can tell me what he likes. And so he was the other half of Cain and Abel. They were the two people. And the irony was they were close friends. Unlike Cain and Abel, they were actually very different, but close friends.
There you are. Mika in Montclair in the United States says, do you really think you're so very old, Jeffrey? I am almost 89 and still going on my favourite Viking cruise next year and in 2022. Jeffrey can come with me on the Mississippi cruise.
Do you think your 80 is very old?
Old? You insulting lump wherever you are. I'm a child. I haven't begun yet. What do you mean?
Exactly.
Old.
You're not old.
Now, it's very interesting you say that. I think it's, if you've still got the energy and the brain is still ticking. I mean, I'll tell you a sad story, Anne. When I was at Oxford, I used to do a bit of running, and that was the sport I did.
Yeah, you were good.
And I had the privilege and honor of running for my country. But one of the greatest athletes of my era was called Adrian Metcalf. And he was an Olympic silver medalist. He was a European record holder. He was truly great Yorkshireman. And we met at Oxford, and I loved him. I absolutely loved him. And he was the best man at my wedding. At the age of 60, he got Alzheimer's.
Oh.
He doesn't know who I am. He doesn't know who Mary is. He can't remember either of us. And he was the brightest, sharpest tool in the box, that one. Read English at Magdalen College, a lovely human being. And you know, when you ask that question, Anne, I'm so lucky at 80 to still be writing every morning, going flat out, when my closest friend doesn't even know who I am. So the answer to the question, you require a bit of luck on that one.
Yeah.
You can't automatically decide your health. And that has been a great privilege to still be going flat out at night. But the pathetic person who asked the question, wherever you are, I wonder how old you are. Keep going, keep fighting, don't give in.
Absolutely. I think that's what they meant. Dan in Fort Mill says, I've recently finished reading Hidden in Plain Sight. It's a great read. When will we expect the next book in the series?
When's book 3? When is book 3?
Oh, you've already read book 2 then?
Yeah.
You're one of those awful people who rings me or writes to me or emails me the day after and says, when's book 3? As if I can do one a week. You know, these books, Hidden in Plain Sight, is 18 drafts, every one handwritten, because I can't type, and they take about 1,000 hours. And no sooner it's been out a week than people write and say, when's the next one? Well, you're quite right to ask when's the next one. Thank you very much indeed. But yes, you'll see the next one on the 1st of April. You will see the 3rd book, which is Turn a Blind Eye, which is the story of police corruption. You'll see that on April the 1st. And as I told you earlier, Anne, if I can keep on going, we'll get all the way through to Commissioner. At the moment, we're only on Chief Inspector.
Yeah, absolutely. No, you get him all the way to the top. Lots of questions about how you, when you were, we saw a picture of when you were the youngest ever MP in the House of Commons at one point, and then you had to give up your life in politics because of money problems and all the rest of it. And that's when you thought, the only way out of this situation is to write a novel. How did you get that first novel published?
How did you get your first novel published?
Well, it was very difficult. 14 publishers turned it down, not a penny more, not a penny less. The 15th publisher, Jonathan Cape, published it. They published 3,000 copies. They just about sold them out. Then the second book, Shall We Tell the President, they published 8,000 copies and they just about sold them out. And Mary was telling me to get a proper job.
Yes.
And then I wrote Cain and Abel and they sold 1 million copies in the first week. And it's now been read by 100 million people. I mean, that changed my life overnight. So I say to people who want to be published, by the way, I don't hold the record. at 14. J.K. Rowling had many more failures than I did. I don't think she got published until about the 20th publisher. And she's the most successful author on earth. So you've got to be persistent and believe in yourself. You've got to go on. You mustn't give up. My wonderful agent, Deborah Owen, never gave up. In fact, I'll tell you a little secret for your people from Viking. She sold Sweden before she sold England.
Is that
And now,
right?
of course, it's now in 127 countries. It's now in 38 languages. It wasn't a big hit. It wasn't a big. Once I'd written Cain and Abel, people went back and purchased it in great numbers, I'm happy to say. But no, the beginning, I say to all of you out there, 3,000 copies, 14 publishers turned me down. I got lucky and went on. It's very, 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 very few people make it on the first book.
Yes. Yeah. Well, it's the old story, isn't it? Even the Beatles were turned down by many, many, many record companies. And look how well they did in the end.
You're very kind. In old age now, I do realize how very privileged and lucky I've been. You know, I was in a car in India quite recently, driving into Delhi, and I said to my driver, "Oh, look, there's Picasso. Oh, and there's Mozart. Oh, and there's Newton." He said, "What do you mean, Geoffrey?" And I said, "How can you know these poor young children on the side of the road? How can you know how much talent is sitting out there and not being given the opportunity?" So I always say to people, I don't believe in equality. I never have. I believe in equality of opportunity and work hard and good luck. And every time I go to India and see those little children, I think what most they've got to do in every country on earth in that situation is give them a chance. I've been very, very lucky.
You've been very lucky, but you've also had a gift that you've been able to give to people, because when people go on holiday or get a break and they want to just lie back with a good book, that is a gift you are able to give them. I know, because sometimes I give your books as Christmas presents, and people absolutely love to receive a Geoffrey Archer novel. And that's a wonderful thing. That's a wonderful thing. So look,
It's thrilling.
We've come to the end of a long hour, and my shepherd's pie is getting cold.
But I'll tell you a problem. Before you say your shepherd's pie, I'm going to tell you a problem. Don't scowl like that, Anne. How dare you?
I'm hungry.
Shepherd's pie, the best meal on earth. But I was going to tell you, gosh, I've shot it out of my mind. I was going to tell you a problem, knocked it out of my mind with books. Now I can't remember.
Well, I was saying.
What did you say? What was the sentence before?
In case it trips your memory again, I was saying that the ability to give somebody a book and to give them a story.
Oh yes, I remember.
You've told. That's
yes.
a tremendous thing.
Shush, Anne. Shush. I remember. People stop me in the street and they quote a couple of lines from one of my books that I wrote 30 years ago. And I can't remember it because it's 30 years ago and I've written 20 books since then. And they say, why, can't you tell me why you wrote that sentence? I said, and they have to tell me which book, which chapter. And in Cain and Abel, I've got used to people coming up in the street and saying certain sentences like, "He raised his hat, it was enough."
Oh, yes.
That was when the two men see each other in the street for the final time before they die.
And
He raised his hat, it was enough. And many women say to me, when William Cain is going back to see his daughter-in-law for the first time, having refused to meet her for 30 years, and she is climbing the steps to meet this old man. And I wrote the sentence, William Lowell Kane would have stood to greet her, but he couldn't.
Oh.
He was dead.
Oh.
F. Scott Fitzgerald teaches us that when you want to say something simple, don't expend it. Don't spend a long time over it. Say something in a couple of sentences that every reader, he says, if you're very lucky, they'll cry. He said, if they laugh, if you can make them laugh, that's a gift. If you can make them cry, that's so much more difficult.
Yes.
And he would have risen, but he couldn't. He was dead. And a lot of women say that to me. And of course, she went on in The Prodigal Daughter, the following book, to become the first woman president of the United States. Wake up, America. Wake up. I wrote that book 40 years ago. Wake up, America. If you can't do better than Biden and Trump, start looking to your women.
Absolutely. Well, there is a very interesting woman in the vice presidential office, maybe. So anyway, we'll wait and see about that. We won't go into politics now, or we could talk for another few hours. But I'm going to let you get back to your shepherd's pie and champagne now. It's been a privilege to meet you again. And yes, exactly, me too. I can't wait.
Where's yours? Where's yours?
Can
I confess it's gone cold in the last hour, and I blame you.
I know, I blame you.
Oh, all right.
I can almost hold it up. Sorry about that.
Actually, it's good.
But maybe next year, and certainly, hopefully, on a Viking cruise ship, we will have a very special shepherd's pie and champagne evening.
Yes,
cheers.
Please.
Cheers, my dear. Thank you very much.
You're very good health, young lady. May you live to be 100.
Absolutely,
and may I be there to celebrate it with you.
Yes, you.
And happy Christmas to all Viking people. Viking people are special. Happy Christmas.
Thank you so much, Jeffrey. Let me just tell everybody that, thank you, Jeffrey, that next week, it's a very special week, actually, as we close into Christmas. It's Dog Appreciation Week here on Viking Television. And my guest will be the author Claire Cook, whose novel Must Love Dogs was turned into a major Hollywood film starring Diane Lane and John Cusack. And there are now 7 books, apparently, in the Must Love Dogs series. Claire will be discussing the stories in the films and how she got inspired to write them. As you know, I'm sure, here on Viking Television, we're all real dog fans, particularly Karina and all her dogs, and Lady Carnarvon and all hers. So we'll talk unashamedly about dogs next week here on Viking Television, and we'll look forward to having a very happy Christmas. Meanwhile, as we tuck into our shepherd's pie, let me just thank Jeffrey again for joining us this evening, yes, and tuck into one of his books maybe as well in the coming few days as we look forward to the holidays. So until next Thursday, have a wonderful and very safe week, please. And I look forward to seeing you again next Thursday, same time, same place. Bye-bye.